There is a moment in life when someone makes the worst mistake they will ever make. Not because they are unlucky, not because things just went wrong, but because they looked at a quiet, calm man standing right in front of them, and they thought he was weak. They thought he was just some old guy, easy target, someone they could push around, laugh at, and walk away from like nothing happened. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and by the time they figured it out, it was already too late. This is the story of the day a group of thugs decided to humiliate Steven Seagal, and what happened next is something none of them will ever forget for the rest of their lives. To understand this story, you first have to understand who Steven Seagal actually is. Because if you only know him from movies, you might think he is just an actor, a big Hollywood guy who pretends to fight on camera, someone with stunt doubles and special effects doing all the hard work. But that is not the full picture, not even close. Steven Seagal was born in Lansing, Michigan in 1952. As a young kid, he was not exactly what you would call tough. He was thin, he had asthma, and he was bullied a lot at school. Other kids picked on him because he seemed like an easy target. He was quiet, he kept to himself, and he did not fight back. But something was building inside him during those early years, a quiet fire, a determination that most people around him could not yet see. When his family moved to California, everything changed. A teenage Steven Seagal walked into a martial arts gym for the first time, and the moment he stepped onto that mat, something clicked. It was like he had found the thing he was born to do. He trained obsessively, not like a hobby, like a mission, every single day. Hours upon hours of practice, sweat, and discipline. While other kids were out having fun, Steven was in the gym, perfecting his technique, building his skills, sharpening himself into something dangerous. But even California was not enough for him. At the age of 17, Steven Seagal did something almost no young American had ever done before. He moved to Japan. Japan, by himself, as a teenager. He didn't speak the language. He didn't know anyone. He had almost no money, but he went anyway, because that is where the true masters of martial arts lived, and he was not going to settle for anything less than learning from the best. In Japan, Steven Seagal trained under some of the most respected martial arts instructors in the world. He dedicated himself completely to Aikido, a Japanese martial art that uses an opponent's own strength and movement against them. Aikido is not about punching someone as hard as you can. It's about control, precision, using very little effort to cause a very large result. A trained Aikido master can take down someone twice their size using nothing more than a wrist grab and a perfectly timed redirect. Steven did not just learn Aikido, he mastered it at a level that shocked even his Japanese teachers. He trained so hard and became so good that he was eventually given something almost nobody outside of Japan had ever received before. He was awarded a 7th Dan black belt in Aikido. To give you an idea of what that means, most martial artists spend their entire lifetime and never get past 3rd or 4th Dan. A 7th Dan is reserved for people who are not just skilled, but legendary. And it didn't stop there. Steven Seagal became so trusted within the Japanese martial arts community that he was given the honor of running his own dojo in Japan. He became a teacher, a sensei, an instructor respected by some of the hardest, toughest fighters in the world. He didn't just study the art, he became part of it.
When Steven eventually returned to the United States, he brought all of that with him. Every lesson, every technique, every hard day on the mat in Japan. It was all stored inside his body, wired into his muscles, locked into his instincts. And here's the thing about someone who is trained at that level. You can't see it just by looking at them. There's no flashing sign, no warning label. When Steven Seagal walked into a room, he looked like a regular person. Calm, quiet, relaxed. That calm exterior is actually a huge part of what makes a trained fighter dangerous. The ones who have truly mastered their art do not need to act tough. They don't need to flex or shout or try to intimidate people. They are already dangerous. They know it. They just don't need to announce it. And that quiet confidence is exactly what got misread on the night everything went wrong. It was an ordinary evening. Steven was out, not in a movie studio, not at a red carpet event, just a regular man going about his life in the real world like everybody else. A group of men noticed him, and something about the way he carried himself, or maybe just the fact that they recognized his face from somewhere and thought he was just some soft celebrity, made them decide he was someone they could mess with. These were not random, confused teenagers. These were grown men who clearly thought they were tough. The kind of people who looked for targets, who got a rush from making other people feel small, who saw someone they thought they could dominate and decided to go for it. They got in his space. They started talking to him in that aggressive, mocking tone designed to embarrass someone, to make them feel small, to make people watching think the target is weak and the bullies are in charge. One of them put a hand on him. Now, you have to understand something. For most people, that moment when someone physically grabs you or shoves you, that's when the panic sets in. The heart starts pounding, the legs feel shaky, the brain starts desperately trying to figure out how to escape or defuse the situation. Steven did not panic. He didn't get loud, he didn't start shouting threats or trying to look tough. He didn't back away. He just looked at the man who had touched him, and his expression barely changed. If any of those men had any experience around truly dangerous people, they would have recognized that look. It's not anger, it's not fear, it's something much colder than both of those. It's the calm focus of someone who has been in this situation 1,000 times on a training mat, and whose body already knows exactly what to do. The moment the first man made his move, Steven responded, not with a wild swing, not with chaos, with precision. What witnesses described was almost hard to process because it happened so fast and looked so effortless. 1 second the man was grabbing at Steven, the next second that same man was on the ground, and he had no clear memory of exactly how he got there. That's Aikido. That's what decades of training looks like in real life. You don't see a big dramatic punch. You see a small redirection, a perfectly placed pivot, a wrist lock or a throw that uses the opponent's own strength, takes their own aggression and confidence, and takes them completely off balance. The others in the group stared. The thing about watching something like that happen to someone else is that it's deeply, deeply unsettling, because in your mind you had a plan. You thought you knew how this was going to go. You had done this before. You had pushed people around before. It always worked a certain way. And now the person you targeted is standing there completely calm, and your friend is on the ground, and you are suddenly very aware that you have made an enormous miscalculation. A couple of them tried to regroup and pushed forward anyway, maybe out of pride, Maybe because they had already committed and couldn't back down in front of each other. It didn't help them. Each one that made contact with Steven Seagal ended up in the same situation as the first, controlled, redirected, and neutralized with a speed and efficiency that made it look almost casual, like Steven wasn't even breaking a sweat, like this was a mild inconvenience rather than a fight, because for him it was. When you have trained for decades under the greatest martial arts masters in the world, when you have spent years in Japan doing nothing but perfecting your technique, when your body has performed these movements so many thousands of times that they are as natural as breathing, a street confrontation with untrained men is not a challenge. It's just muscle memory clicking into place. The group had come looking for an easy victim, a celebrity they could humiliate, a quiet, calm man they could push around and mock in front of everyone watching. What they found instead was one of the most trained and dangerous human beings they had ever encountered in their lives.
There is a lesson buried deep inside moments like this, and it is a lesson worth thinking about carefully. We live in a world where people make assumptions about others based on how they look, based on whether someone is old or young, big or small, loud or quiet, based on whether someone drives a flashy car or wears expensive clothes or acts aggressive enough to seem threatening. But real capability does not always advertise itself. Real strength is not always obvious. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one standing quietly in the corner, speaking softly, not trying to impress anyone. Steven Seagal spent years being underestimated as a skinny, asthmatic kid who got picked on at school, as a young American in Japan trying to earn respect in a culture that was not his own, as a Hollywood actor who people assumed was just playing a tough guy on screen rather than actually being one in real life. And every single time someone underestimated him, he simply kept working, kept training, kept building himself into something extraordinary. There is something powerful about that, about the idea that you do not need everyone to know what you are capable of, that you can carry your strength quietly, that you can walk through the world without announcing yourself, without trying to intimidate or impress, because you know what you have built inside yourself, and that knowledge is enough. The men who confronted Steven Seagal that night found out in the hardest possible way that quiet confidence is not weakness, it is something else entirely. After that night, accounts of what happened spread quickly. Word got around, the way word always does when something unexpected happens. People who heard the story reacted the way people always react to this kind of story, with a mixture of disbelief and awe, and the particular satisfaction that comes from watching someone who thought they could bully their way through a situation get proven completely wrong. Because here's the truth. Most people in the world are decent. Most people are just trying to get through their day, looking after their family, doing their job, minding their business. And most decent people have been in a situation at some point where someone tried to make them feel small, where someone used aggression or cruelty or sheer size to try to push them around. And most decent people in that moment had to make a decision about what to do when they did not have the training or the ability to physically defend themselves. That is why stories like this resonate so deeply, because they tap into something universal, the fantasy of being able to face down a bully and not flinch, the satisfaction of watching arrogance meet its consequences,
the reminder that the world is not always arranged in favor of the loudest, most aggressive person in the room. Steven Seagal had spent his entire adult life building a set of skills that most people will never develop, not because those people are lazy or weak, but because the kind of dedication required, moving across the world as a teenager, spending years in a foreign culture, training daily under masters for decades, that is an extraordinary level of commitment that very few people in the world will ever make. But what he did with those skills, the way he carried them quietly, the way he did not escalate unnecessarily, the way he responded to aggression with precise, controlled force rather than blind rage, that is something anyone can learn from. Because the goal of real training, whether it is martial arts or anything else, is not to become someone who goes looking for fights. The goal is to become someone who never needs to, someone who is so capable and so calm that most situations never escalate in the first place, because people can sense, on some level they might not even be able to name, that this is not someone to test. The men that night tested him anyway, and the lesson they received was comprehensive. Steven Seagal went on to have one of the most unusual careers of anyone in Hollywood history. The martial arts skills he brought back from Japan became the foundation of his film work, and movies like Above the Law, Hard to Kill, and Under Siege made him one of the biggest action stars on the planet throughout the late 1980s and 1990s. But unlike many action stars, whose on-screen fighting is entirely manufactured by choreographers and stunt teams, Steven's films were different. The techniques you saw him using on screen were real techniques. The Aikido throws, the joint locks, the smooth and almost effortless way he moved through a fight scene, that was not made up for the camera. That was the actual art he had trained in for decades. Martial arts experts who watched his early films often noted how different his movements looked compared to other action stars. There was a fluidity to it, an efficiency. He was not the biggest or the most muscular person in his movies, but the way he moved told a different story. This was not someone pretending. This was someone who had genuinely been trained. And that's the detail that the men who confronted him that night had failed to notice or simply refused to believe. In the end, the story of what happened when those thugs tried to humiliate Steven Seagal is not really about a fight. It's about what happens when you mistake calmness for weakness. When you look at a man and see only the surface of him without understanding what lies underneath. It's about the years of 5 a.m. mornings in a Japanese dojo when nobody was watching, the countless hours of drilling the same technique over and over until it became instinct, the discipline of a teenager who left everything he knew and traveled to the other side of the world because he was willing to pay whatever price was required to become truly excellent at something. All of those years, all of that sacrifice, all of that invisible work compressed into a single moment in an ordinary evening when a group of men made a very bad decision. Steven Seagal did not need to prove himself that night. He did not go looking for that situation. He did not want it, but when it arrived, he was ready. He has always been ready. Because that's what real preparation does. It does not guarantee you will never face a hard moment. It guarantees that when the hard moment comes, you will already know what to do. The thugs that night walked away with something they probably never expected to carry with them. Not just bruises and wounded pride, but a very clear and very personal understanding of a truth that most people only ever hear secondhand. Never assume you know what someone is capable of just from looking at them. Never mistake quiet for weakness, and never, ever pick on the calm one.